All right. Hello, nerds for humanity. I am here with Philip from New York, who is one of the amazing Biden supporting folks on Twitter who offered to come on to the live stream and have a conversation. There's so much kind of like very short form debates on Twitter that you really can't get into a whole lot of nuance. And so I put a request out. I said, hey, all you Biden supporters are so frustrated with Dean Phillips. Would any of you be up for coming on to the show and giving me just like, an opportunity to have a conversation? So welcome to the show, Philip, and thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we get started with like just a little bit of background about yourself, Philip? Like just tell the audience whatever you want about who you are.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Philip, and I'm in law school right now. But I've worked on a lot of campaigns in the past. I was a big, Bernie Sanders supporter in 2020, and did a lot of campus organizing for him. But then, when Bernie, lost in the primary, I said, we got to defeat Trump because this is an existential threat to our democracy and every issue that we all care about. And so I worked for the Biden campaign, digital in Nevada. Then I also was working in the Maine Senate race and for Biden campaign in Maine. And then, we got the result we needed. Thank God we defeated Trump, but Trump didn't really want to go away. So now I'm working kind of while doing law school, just trying to, on Twitter, make people more aware of all the really good things that Biden has done. Because I think a big problem is that Biden's done a lot of amazing stuff, but a lot of people don't know about it. And I think, as Dean Phillips talks a lot about, like a lot of this is about like marketing and making sure that you get your message out to people and they understand what you stand for. And I think we have a really good opportunity in 2024 to draw a really clear contrast between Biden and Trump. And so I wanted to help make that contrast extra clear.
Love it. I mean, first of all, we share admiration for Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this is a controversial one, but I kind of feel like we might not have had a Trump ever if he had been the nominee in 2016. But that wasn't to be. And in hindsight, like so much of what he's talking about, the Medicare for all stuff was so crazy, sounded so outside the norm back in 2016, but now I think we've all come around, and I also really appreciate his even-handed position on the Middle East, where he's willing to kind of hold Netanyahu to task and say, hey, this is not okay. Like we can't keep supporting this unlimited bombing. So, but unfortunately, Bernie is not in the race.
Yeah, bummer, right? What a great guy.
And one of the things that I will say about you mentioned like, hey, it's important to communicate what Biden has done. I actually, and a lot of Biden supporters, I don't think they may not grok some of the Dean supporters' views, which is like many of us agree that Biden has done a lot of great things legislatively. And I certainly appreciate Biden having his first term as opposed to having a second term of Trump. Like that's no question in my mind. I think our concern, or mine at least, I'll just speak for myself, is wow, this campaigning is a full contact sport, and being a great communicator, like Bernie, great communicator, Obama, great communicator, Bill Clinton, you have to be able to, and sadly, even in a weird way, Trump with his people is a very effective communicator. I don't see that for Biden. So I kind of feel like, wow, this is a guy that isn't selling his impact and isn't out there enough. So that's kind of my biggest concern about him, is like less about his policies and more about, can he win in November?
Yeah.
And if he can't, like, what would be the result of another 4 years of Trump?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question. I think I'm glad we agree that he's done a lot of awesome stuff.
Yeah,
and that I think we also agreed, like, if it somehow ended up that like Dean Phillips was the nominee, I think we all have to get behind him and make sure he wins against Trump, the same way that for Biden. But I think you're right. Like campaigning is really exhausting. It's a lot of work. Like working on campaigns myself. Even if you're not the candidate, oof, it's brutal. You went to New Hampshire, I think, right, to work.
Oh my God, it was. I was out of gas after only 2.5 weeks. It was crazy.
Yeah. But I think, for one thing, I think that Biden has a lot to run on to begin with, and like that's part of the core of like campaigning, right? You have to have a message that like is actually going to be, you have something to say, basically. I think there's a lot of accomplishments to talk about. But is he like in his like sprightly, like 20-year-old self who can like run across a football field? Like Dean Phillips, like I'll admit, like he can beat Biden in a foot race any day of the week, right? But I think that Biden has some advantages that just Dean Phillips doesn't when it comes to campaigning, and one of them is just incumbency, right? Like one thing Biden has done really well is he's gone to a lot of these kind of like great ribbon cutting events of like, oh, we're gonna like open this bridge in this state, we're going to build this road in this state, and people I think do appreciate that, and it's part of why he's gotten some really important endorsements that are going to be really crucial in 2024, like the UAW, right? And that was really an example of Biden building a really strong connection over all these years with unions and union leadership, and then delivering by like standing on the picket line with the UAW and helping them negotiate higher wages, and then them coming out recently and supporting him. And that's going to be a huge in 2024, especially in Michigan. And then you also have other unions like I think it's the Culinary Workers Union in Nevada, who he has a really close relationship with too. So I think Biden does have some really good relationships with important organizations across the country that are going to be really important. I also would say that like building a national coalition and campaign is like a really difficult thing. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of partnerships, and also just connecting with voters. And Biden has demonstrated he can do that already. He built a coalition, includes like voters of all races, all ages, lots of different socioeconomic backgrounds, to win in 2020. And in the primary, I think thinking about who can like campaign and win, we had an example of New Hampshire where like New Hampshire is a very like independent state, right? A lot of independents vote in New Hampshire. We have opportunities for young people to be heard there. And Biden was able to, on a write-in campaign, despite not even like being there, right, on the ground, was able to get, I think, a pretty strong performance. And Dean Phillips was able only to get, I think, around 19%, 20%. It's not like Dean Phillips is like a bad candidate or anything. It's just that like it showed that Biden can build a coalition even as a write-in candidate. And of course, South Carolina, we also saw, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, like everyone hates Biden, right? Oh, like he's polling terribly, but he got 96% of the vote there. And I just feel like if it was like really true that like Democrats were just didn't like Biden, didn't want to vote for him, I think you wouldn't be seeing the results you're seeing. And then it comes down also to the final point of like fundraising, which I think is really important too. Because like you can't run a good campaign without money. And I think that's something that we all wish wasn't the case. I think especially as like Dean talks about this too a lot. I think it's really great that he talks about this of like getting the money out of politics, making it not crazy expensive to run for office. But right now it's going to be a national campaign with a crazy amount of money spent. And Biden is completely crushing Trump when it comes to fundraising. And the huge cash advantage the DNC has up against the RNC. And that's going to be like a huge difference if we're talking about like state organizations and actually like getting people like knocking on doors, calling voters, and getting ads up on the air. And I worry that if you just like subbed out Biden for someone else who doesn't have the kind of ability to not only fundraise a lot of great money for the party, build relationships with unions and different voting coalitions, I worry you would actually have a worse result in November, which I don't think any of us want. But that's all to say, like Biden might not be like the perfect candidate as we're thinking about, but like I think he is better than the alternatives. And like Biden says this a lot, right? Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. I think that at the end of the day, I'm not sure how you replace Biden at this point with anyone else and don't get a worse result.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the advantages you described in terms of fundraising, like the unions, there's also like, I feel like the Democratic Party has strong advantages on policy issues, especially around reproductive rights. I would argue that all of those tailwinds would benefit any major Democratic nominee. It's not like, oh, people are like, I'm going to give this money for Biden, but Whitmer's the new nominee. I'm not going to give it to her. I think there's a lot of people that don't want to see Trump and are willing to kind of pay to make sure that happens. So I'm curious to get your thoughts. Like, do you think there's, whoops, hold on a second. Do you think there's like legitimate, do you think there's legitimate pro Biden support, or is it mostly like anti-Trump?
I think it's a mix. I think it's mostly probably like a feeling of like anti-Trump, but I'm not sure that's because I don't think it's because like people don't like Biden. I think it's more because like Trump is so awful that like that overrides everything, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there are some things that like Biden does have that are like kind of unique benefits. One of them is just that like he's very well defined. Like there's not going to be like a lot of like crazy stuff that comes out about Biden in like October that like we never knew about, right? Like I think Biden is someone who, because he's been in politics for so long, people have a general idea of who he is. They know he's like a good, honest, decent guy, and they might think he's too old, but like they know he's like not a bad guy. Like, and that's the kind of like image that I think is kind of positive in like this crazy toxic politics that we have now, that like he's a good guy, but a voter might say, oh, he's a little too old. Like, but he's a good guy. And I think that's something that also I like that Dean Phillips says a lot of times on when he goes on air. He's like, listen, I just want to be clear. Like, Biden's a good, decent guy. I just have like disagreements on him being able to win. But like, I think it does say something to the fact that Biden is someone I think who generally Americans think he's a good guy, but maybe I don't have like the confidence in him to either beat Trump or do the next term. But those are like different questions that relate. But like, the fundamental question of is he a good guy? I think Americans generally agree on that. That is a really valuable thing, I think, as well.
Yeah, I too think that Joe is a good guy. I think he's an honest. I think he's also an honest man, which is hard, it's rare in politics. Yeah. So agree with you there. So the chances of like somehow people discovering that Biden is not a good guy or did anything wrong, like I think is very low. I do think the chances of him having another press conference where, it's not confidence inspiring is meaningful. And I don't know how many more of those we can take. And at the same time, if he doesn't do any more press availabilities or doesn't do any town halls, I don't think that's going to solve the problem either, because it'll only make people wonder, like, well, why isn't he coming outside? Like, what's his deal? Yeah. What's your read on kind of the risk of, a large series of gaffes that underscores people's concerns about age?
Well, I will say, I think the one thing about Biden is he has been gaffing, I think, his whole life. I think it's not a new thing. I think this isn't the thing that comes so much with age, just comes with Biden. But I think you're right that like there is like it is, I think, unfortunate sometimes that I think Biden doesn't get out there and campaign as like aggressively on media as I think he should. Because I actually don't think that. I think the problem is he'll give this like great speech, right? And it'll be like energetic. He'll be like going back and forth with the reporters. And at the end, he'll like make like a one like little like gaffe, right? And then like everyone clips that, puts it on Twitter, and is like, look how old Biden is. He can't even get through a speech. Like, and I think that is like a problem that we have to face. I don't know if you followed at all the race between Fetterman and Oz in Pennsylvania.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah.
And a big problem with that was basically Fetterman at the start was like, Dr. Oz is from New Jersey. He's not from Pennsylvania. And every time Dr. Oz would make like any small mistake about Pennsylvania, it would get clipped and then like go all over the internet and it'd be like, see, he's not from Pennsylvania. But it's usually pretty like innocent mistakes that like anyone could make. And so I think that is like something that we have to acknowledge. And I think that the Biden campaign at times isn't being as aggressive as they should be. I think you need to just get him out there nonstop and just say, listen, there's going to be gaffes every now and then. But at the end of the day, he knows what he's doing. He's very clear-headed. Yes, he might like say stutter at one point and make a mix-up, but we all do that. Let's move on. And I think the State of the Union I think it's 2 weeks is going to be a good opportunity. I hope everyone watches that, to actually like see Biden in a really public setting, long speech, give kind of his vision for the country. I think he'll do a good job at that, just like he did last year's State of the Union. I know like the Super Bowl interview was another thing he didn't do. I think that would have been good for him to do. But I also think that the campaign was also a little worried about just like nonstop politics throwing at people. People would just get exhausted. And then I think that also Biden does do more events than people give credit for. I think the problem is that like his events are aren't like, really like pizzazzy, like Trump's, like a Trump's rally is like, you can say like 10 crazy things, declare war on NATO and then like, say something really racist. And like, of course the media is going to cover that. But like Biden is like at the UAW talking about like to like a big audience, talking about how important it is that we expand unionization and we get higher wages. The media doesn't really want to cover that, but it's still Biden doing a public event. So I think it's just part of it is that we're really primed as like a, audience to want those kind of like crazy moments. And that's just not who Biden is. But I do think he is ramping up his public events, and he'll do a debate with Trump. I'm very confident that he won't dodge the debate stage. And as the campaign gets up, he's going to be out there more and more. So I think this is something where it's like, it's a temporary thing that it feels like he's not being seen as much. But as the campaign heats up, he will get out there more and more. And I think he'll be able to handle it just fine.
Philip, you're not the first person to mention the State of the Union being like a major event. And I actually feel like that would be the least useful to me as a voter.
Oh, really? How come?
And my rationale is like, okay, it's going to be off a teleprompter. It'll be rehearsed probably weeks in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And will it show us that he can give a speech for, more than, whatever, 20, 30 minutes? Okay, yes. We'll know that he physically can do that. I really would have preferred the 60 Minutes interview before the Super Bowl, or even a town hall before Super Tuesday, where he has to like take questions and not have everything kind of in a binder for him.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I'm just remembering, even though I didn't love Hillary, like she could take interviews. Obama could definitely take interviews. Bill Clinton loved interviews. He was like a pig in the slop with those things. And, even Donald Trump did a CNN town hall. Like, right. So, of course, there were, the audience seemed to be very favorable to him. But still, when do you think we will be able to see unscripted Biden? Because I've seen him in a lot of the ribbon cutting events with prepared remarks, and then maybe takes one or two questions, and then the press staff, okay, no more questions, we're done, and they run out of there. When do you think we'll see more like, the old days, like John McCain, like just hanging out with the press answering questions?
Yeah, I think that he has done a few. There's one long-term interview I think he did a few weeks back, but I'm blanking on the network. But you're right. I think that it would be good for him to get more out there and do those kind of off-the-cuff interviews. And like, I think that I would expect to see that in the next few months. I think part of the problem is that because I think Biden has an approach oftentimes when he's trying to do like bipartisan deals that are really important, and he tries to kind of stay a little bit out of the limelight. And kind of because he doesn't want to kind of cast it as like, if you vote for this bipartisan bill, if you're a Republican, you're in a sense like giving me a win. And we know like the bipartisan border deal, right? He's like, the reason why Republicans are tanking that is because it would fix a lot of the border problems and also help Biden politically. And so I think that Biden might be also a little bit worried about getting out there in the press too much and kind of championing this too much and making Republicans feel even less inclined to vote for it. But the broader point, I think, is just that like, I think Biden's team doesn't feel like people are paying as much attention now and aren't kind of being aggressive about getting Biden in front of the camera. And I think they should be. I think that would expect that to happen in the next few months, especially when you get to like, the convention. Biden's going to be giving another big speech. But after that, I think he's going to be doing a lot of more like sit-down interviews. And I mean, he has a lot of those like press gaggle moments, but you're right. They're not like long-term, like, they're like a couple of minutes. But I do think that Biden will be doing that more and more. And I just think that right now, they're just not really feeling that's a priority. And I think they will get to it more and more, though.
Do you think we'll see a long? I think the interview you're referring to is a ProPublica one. That was a
maybe, yeah.
Let's see, who was the guy? Interview.
I can't remember his name, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I watched it. Let's see. Okay, John Harwood.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched that interview because a lot of Biden supporters on Twitter were like, he has done interviews. Look at this one. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to watch this interview. And the questions were very open-ended, like, they literally weren't like this, but they were in this vein of like, isn't Trump such a threat to democracy? And of course
Isn't
it's
he?
like
Yeah.
softball after softball. So like, all right, I was hoping maybe like get the man on like Meet the Press or Face the Nation or like
Mhm.
where they're like, hey, I'm gonna kind of hold your feet to the fire a little bit. Do you think we'll see that kind of unscripted, more kind of challenging either interview or town hall before Super Tuesday? Because whenever Biden supporters tell me, like, don't worry, after the convention, you're going to see so much of Biden, you're going to love it. And I'm like, yeah, but by then, what happens if like we discover like he doesn't have the goods? Like, there's nothing we can do at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly say at this point, I feel like we're kind of at the point where like if we replace Biden, it's much worse for us anyway. So I feel like we're also at the point now where like we got to kind of commit and go for it.
Hmm.
But I do think that it's it's hard to like give like a guaranteed date, right? Because I'm on the Biden campaign, but I would expect probably he's not going to probably do those interviews right before Super Tuesday. I guess 'cause Super Tuesday is what, like early March, right?
Hmm.
And he's probably going to do a lot of preparation for the State of the Union. That's going to be his focus. But I would expect that, like, you know, after that, you're getting to the point where you're having more and more interviews, more and more media coverage. They start their TikTok. Like, I don't know. I just think it ramps up over time. And I think they're also coming to the conclusion that, you know, the strategy of trying to basically maybe hold back a little bit from like getting Biden out there and like focusing more of the energy on Trump isn't something that's like going to work in the long term. So I think that they're going to put him out there more. Like, there's no like, and I think you're right that like there's a point where like we get to the point of like, well, after the convention, like we're not going to replace Biden. So like, what if like like it turns out like that he can't even speak or something like that, right? And I think we have to kind of like acknowledge the fact that Biden is like mentally there. He's never been the greatest communicator, but you know, he's good enough. He's gonna be good enough on this. Like, if you look at him like the press goggles, like he'll have like a slip up, but at the end of the day, he knows what he's talking about. He can communicate it. And I just think that like with every candidate, there's risks. There's no like risk-free candidate. And it's our job to say, like, well, listen, you know, if Biden like, you know, makes a verbal slip, right? He forgets, he mixes up like was it like Egypt and Mexico at the press
Hmm.
conference, right? Like, listen, that happens. None of us are perfect. You know, we all make mistakes. We all, you know, if we're on camera, we're gonna make mistakes. And but here's why Biden's done a really good job and he's up to the task. I feel like it's part of our job as like people who have like audiences and who have like are focused on kind of getting positive messages out to kind of give the broader context when moments get clipped. But I do think he will be doing a lot more of that over time. It might not happen before Super Tuesday, but I'd be shocked if the campaign wasn't putting him out there more and more as the campaign goes on.
So I know you also suggested some questions that we have to talk about Dean Phillips in a second,
Oh
but
yeah.
one last thing I would make on the whole, like, why I feel like we need to see more of Biden now, not
Mhm.
after the convention. Part of the rationale is we know that, factually speaking, Biden is the oldest president that has ever served and would be, like 86 by the time he leaves.
And the most effective. So let's go together, maybe. Maybe.
Okay, okay. Yeah, he's got a lot done in his first term. I agree with that. Um, it's kind of like if you know that people have this concern, and a lot of people do, and it's not one or two polls, like every poll basically
Mhm.
says it is a concern, even for Democrats. To me, then you should actually go out there even more, to kind of assuage these concerns and show like, no, man, I've still got it. You know, there's there many for those older folks in the audience. Hyundai, the car maker, used to have a terrible reputation. Like people were like, "That's a piece of crap. Like it's going to break down all the time." So they came out with like a 10-year bumper to bumper warranty to say like off the table, like you don't need to worry about the transmission falling out in year 3, kind of thing. And I kind of feel like, wow, wouldn't it be great if Biden was like, you don't think I'm ready? Like, I'm going to be out there every week in environments to show you, like, I'm on top of this. I realize he's got a busy job. Every president that runs for reelection has to find a way.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I
So
think that's
you
a
have,
really valid criticism. I think that I wish he was out there more too. But I guess my point is like I don't think the fact that he's not out there doesn't mean he can't do the job. I think that there's a lot of the events he does do just don't get covered also. So I think the idea like he's not out there at all, like he does do a lot of events, just that the events aren't like as you're talking about, like the big kind of media events where like it's on CNN publicly, you have to a little search for it a little bit more. So I agree with you that like I wish he was out there more. I think that's a very valid criticism to have of the Biden campaign as it's going now. But I would say like from what I've seen of like the press events, it's not something that like I don't think he's up to. I think it's something that they're not feeling like is a huge focus right now, and they will do it eventually. But I don't think it's something that is like he's not capable of doing, I guess is how I see it. But
all right, well,
fair criticism, and I think something the campaign should take seriously.
I hope you're right, Philip. I hope he's got it. And we
He's
just
got
have
it. Believe in him. He's got it. He's got it.
All right. You suggested a question. Does Dean Phillips have any chance of winning the primary? Maybe let me take this one first, and then you can respond. Of course, he has a chance. It is a long shots. He's running against a incumbent president, and he's running in a race where everybody's freaked out about what would happen if Trump won.
Yep.
So because of that, like there isn't a very high appetite for risk from no offense to Congressman Phillips, but a fairly unknown Minnesota congressman, who's more of like a, problem solvers caucus, like that those types don't really get a lot of press coverage, even, when they're in Congress. So there is a path though. And people are going to say like, oh, Tom, you're dreaming, whatever. Might be, but this is America. Anything's possible.
Yeah, you can dream.
So let's dream together, Philip.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to dream.
Jill and Joe take a long walk, and they kind of have a come to Jesus conversation. And they say, you know what? The polls are early, but it's definitely closer than we would like it to be, given that our opponent is like the Antichrist.
Yep.
And you know what? With Ukraine and Israel and the border, like you're going to be pretty busy for the next year. So maybe we seal the legacy and have this historic first term, and you kind of pass the torch to the next generation. Now, then he makes an announcement that I'm not going to run for re-election. The World Affairs have called I need to bring all of my capabilities to focus on that. I believe in our bench, and conventions are for picking nominees. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned democratic way.
CNN would love to cover that one.
They love democratic chaos, yeah.
So, and at that point, maybe Phillips says, hey, I'm the only one that actually has delegates, if you count the New Hampshire ones. I should be considered too. And after several rounds of voting, Phillips is the candidate that has the most support. That is a path.
Okay.
A lot of people say, Tom, you keep pushing Phillips. Like, of course, Phillips is my first choice. But honestly, at this point, given my objective of just beating Trump, I will take any candidate that I think can beat Trump.
Okay.
Right now, I'm not convinced that's Biden, but, a Whitmer, a Shapiro, a Pritzker, a Klobuchar. There's a lot of a Booker. There's so many great Democrats out there.
Kamala Harris?
Maybe. I probably would take Kamala over Biden, but I wouldn't take Kamala over Whitmer or Booker or Shapiro. And that's mainly because I wasn't impressed with her performance in the primaries last time.
Mm-hmm.
And she's had an opportunity to, as vice president, to get a lot more exposure. And I don't think her favorability rating has improved. I think it's a little bit less than Biden's.
Yeah. So I think if the big criticism of Biden is the polling data, I think that, I don't have anything against Kamala Harris, but I do think that she would do worse than Biden. I think polls seem to show that. So I feel like, and that's part of the motivation too, is I feel like in most scenarios where Biden has that, you have that conversation with Jill Biden, they say we don't want to run again, we're trying to cement the legacy. I think most of those scenarios end up with Kamala Harris, the nominee. And then we're having this discussion again, and I have the Kamala Harris, what she's done for you, Twitter account, and you're saying, Philip, can you convince Kamala Harris to drop out because she's polling even worse than Biden, and then we're even more trouble. So I do think that it's an interesting path you talked about of how Dean Phillips could go into convention with the only one with delegates, but I think how it would actually work in that situation would be if Biden dropped out at that point, you'd have a massive write-in campaign where Whitmer, as you're saying, Newsom, Kamala Harris would all be trying to feverishly get on ballots, do writing campaigns, spend millions and millions of dollars trying to get voters to know how to spell everyone's names, because you have to spell everything the exact same for a writing campaign. And then it would end up with who knows who the nominee would be. But I don't think that chaos actually ends up with Dean Phillips at the end of it, in part because this is a good question for you, actually. So let's say Dean Phillips came into the convention, right? And Biden drops out at the convention, right? And Dean Phillips comes in with let's say 3 delegates, okay?
Okay.
He had some delegates in New Hampshire, but he wasn't able to win any other states.
Mm-hmm.
So Dean Phillips is the only candidate with delegates, but he's only got 3. Do you think the Democratic thing is to say well, Dean Phillips is the only one who has delegates, who's gotten votes, so he should be the nominee? Or is the Democratic thing to say, well, listen, Dean Phillips is the only one who Democratic voters specifically chose not to vote for in the majority against Biden? Is he the one person who shouldn't be the nominee because he's the one person who didn't get the majority of votes and was running? But
so I think based on, I think it comes down to what happens in Michigan and Super Tuesday.
Yeah.
And if Michigan and Super Tuesday look like South Carolina, where Dean just is wiped out, then he's not going to have very much of a case in the convention. If anything, it'll be well, you were on the ballot and literally nobody picked you.
Yeah.
That would be problematic for Phillips, in which case I think, maybe he gets a cabinet role somewhere.
I think he's smart. Yeah. It could be
yeah. But I think in the long run for Phillips, I would say, hey man, you did serve the country because you helped us pick a stronger candidate than what we were going to go with. Mm-hmm. And ideally that candidate won. And you also helped protect Joe's legacy. Everybody won.
It's interesting though. I was looking at some polling data of the past. I think there was an Emerson poll that came out that a state by state put Whitmer on some of the polls, put Newsom and put Kamala Harris.
Yeah,
and it was really interesting because Whitmer and Newsom obviously don't have the same kind of name recognition as Biden, so their starting point was a little lower. It was in the 30s in most of these states, and Biden was in the low 40s. Mm-hmm. But it was also interesting to look at the ceiling of what Trump's support was, because against Biden, Trump was getting around 45% of the vote in these state polls. And Biden was getting about 40, 43% or so, 42, something around that range. Mm-hmm. And then when it put Newsom versus Trump shoots up to 47, 48%. Mm-hmm. Kamala Harris against Trump shoots up to 49%. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't the kind of thing where because with Dean Phillips, I think it's fair to say if he was polled, he would probably lose to Trump, but a lot of that would be name recognition. Mm-hmm. But I think it does show that we have this idea that Trump has a ceiling of 45, 46%. And it feels like that is the case against Biden, but it might not be the case against other candidates, in part because when you're not as well known, it's much easier to define you as bad or evil or things like that. And so I do think that there is an assumption that, well, if we just replaced Biden with, any kind of generic Democrat, mm-hmm. of course they'd do better. And I think polling data on that isn't so clear. I know there was one poll, I think, that was in Michigan that showed Whitmer doing better than Biden, right? Mm-hmm. But she's the governor of a state, that would make sense that she would do better in her home state to begin with, right? But looking at the recent, I think it was Emerson poll, and I can get the numbers for you if you want. It seemed to show that Biden actually outperformed Newsom Kamala Harris, and Whitmer wasn't included in all the polls, but Whitmer as well on a national level. And so I think if you add in like the chaos of the convention, I know like it would be super entertaining. Like I know you both like politics. Like how like crazy would that be if there was like a contested convention? But I think what you'd end up having is a lot of really kind of the big divisions of the Democratic Party kind of like really bubbling to the surface. Things like, people who are like very hardcore Medicare for all, people who like don't support that, whether people support like reparations or not, whether people support, how people view the war in Gaza. Like, I think what you'd end up having is a lot of people leaving that convention feeling like, my candidate wasn't chosen, I wasn't heard, this was anti-democratic, these delegates just chose who they wanted, but I wanted Kamala Harris, or I wanted Dean Phillips, or I wanted Gretchen Whitmer, but I wasn't heard. And I think the one thing about Biden is at least Biden is campaigning in these states. He's winning the primary, in pretty large margins. Voters are affirmatively saying like we're given a choice between like Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson and Biden, and we're choosing Biden. Biden becomes nominee. That is like much more like the will of the Democratic voters. I think like a chaotic convention not only kind of goes against the will of the voters, it also I think puts us in a really vulnerable place where now we've lost our big fundraiser. We've also like don't even know who's going to emerge from that, if they're even going to be stronger than Biden. So all this chaos could just be for nothing. And now this new candidate, who's the new like presidential candidate we're putting all our hopes on, has like 10 weeks to build like a strong national campaign, get their name recognition up, and defeat like arguably a really strong marketer in Trump. And I just think like at the end of the day, I think that's way riskier. And I think it ends up most of the time with us having a worse result in November. It's not to say that Biden is like a lock to win. Like, I think it's a really scary situation we have, right? Like it's a coin flip. Like that's what this election is. It's a coin flip. And a coin flip for our democracy is like, that's not a fun coin flip. But I just think that, there isn't always like a great choice to have a guaranteed win. Sometimes you have to just choose the best option there is. And I don't know, do you think that like after all that chaos, the result would actually be better than Biden? And like, what if that chaos ended up choosing Kamala Harris as the nominee? Do you think we'd be in a better position after all that, or including all the chaos of the convention?
Okay, so first of all, it is not the way I would have wanted the nominee to be selected. I would have preferred that in September of last year, Biden said, "I'm not running again. Let the open competitive primary begin." And we all get to see our people out there, and they go for debates, and New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina. Everybody gets to weigh in, but that's not what we got. And so I think it comes down to, if you are confident that Biden can hold it together and be credible in the next 9 months, between now and November, then why have a chaotic convention? However, if you believe that, I don't think Biden can hold it together the next 9 months, I think there's going to be a August, September, October, November surprise, and they'll be bad, then you might be willing to have a chaotic convention. They're both not great options. Like, one is like we all kind of hold our breath and just like, oh God, hope nothing crazy happens to him. Or we go through a convention where there will be a very strong case to make for Harris.
Yeah.
Which is, hey, she's the VP, would be a historic candidacy. That's you can't ignore that argument. It's a very valid argument. On the other side, it'll be like, well, but we need to beat Trump. Is this the best person to beat Trump? So either way, it would be amazing TV. I don't think I would sleep.
Yeah.
But here we are, and I know we're running a little short on time, Philip. I wanted to get some audience questions before we wrap up. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. James L has more of a comment saying, "Hey, why haven't there been primaries in like Florida I think the Florida people would say there's no point. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
What's your take on that
I
kind of
think they
thing?
should have primaries in every state. I think that's like good for our democracy. I think it just also just makes it better for everyone to feel like they got heard in the same way that like I think a chaotic convention where delegates just choose who is the nominee without input from voters, that's not good. I think we should have them in every state. I think we should also be like upfront about the fact that like the reason why like Biden is going to be the nominee is not because like they didn't have a primary in Florida, right? It's because he's winning by like insane margins in like South Carolina and New Hampshire, and like that's the reason why he's gonna be the nominee. So I think when people say the words like rigging, like I get that like it's frustrating, and I think like there's like for example like in Republicans in like Virginia, like I think they have like a convention process. They don't even have like a vote for their nominee for governor. That's how they got like a really good candidate for the governor's race in Virginia in Youngkin. So parties do this all the time where they kind of change up the process to like benefit certain candidates, and it's not great. And I think like it's a totally valid criticism. Like they should have a primary in every state, let Biden show that he can win every state. But I also think we should be honest about the fact that like this isn't going to change the result. Like it's not something that like if Florida had their primary, it's not going to mean that Dean Phillips is the nominee. Biden still is not going to be the nominee. So I get the frustration. I'd also just say like I think my understanding is that in those states, can Dean Phillips still do a write-in campaign or get a number of signatures to get on the ballot? I think that in most of those states, you can still do that. And I would only say that, like, if you're doing a write-in campaign, like Biden had to do a write-in campaign in New Hampshire, and he won. So, like, that's all to say, like, I think there's still opportunities if Dean Phillips wants to contest those states still. But the problem is that, like, he wouldn't win on a write-in campaign like Biden can, in part because I think Biden is just a more popular, stronger candidate in the Democratic Party that can do a write-in campaign. So,
yeah, I think in those states where Dean was removed or not allowed or couldn't get on the ballot for whatever reason, I think you're right that people can always write in whoever they want.
right.
I think in Florida's case, I don't even think they're going to have a primary. I don't think it was. I don't know that they're going to actually have a date where people go and vote for someone, or it'll just be one person, one name on the ballot. That's just weird.
I thought it was keeping him off the ballot. I might be wrong about that, but let's see.
Well,
but yeah, I think the general point is like we should have primaries all the time. Like I think there's nothing wrong with having that as a very valid criticism. But also, I think there are actually writing opportunities. So I think that and I think also like it's not going to be actually change the result overall. So I think it's not the most important thing to focus on when we're talking about like Dean Phillips versus Biden kind of stuff. But it's a valid criticism, I think.
All right, Philip, is there any evidence that would convince you that Biden doesn't have it?
Sure. I think that a good example actually is with Dianne Feinstein. I don't know if you follow, I guess she was your senator, right?
Yeah.
And the big thing you got out consistently in that case was people leaking all the time that like, oh, I'm in a meeting and, she like doesn't remember who I am, or like, she is at like a committee hearing and like, she's like just like verbatim reading like from like the questions sheet, and then she goes back and reads it again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, or like people is like I think those kind of leaks that come out are like important to get a sense of like what's going on the inside. And so things like that were happening. People come out saying like, listen, I just had a conversation with Biden, he didn't know who I was, or like, Biden was talking to me about the Middle East, but like he like, was saying like that, like, talking about like it was like the 1920s. It was like if things were coming out that were like showing like Biden is like crumbling, then like that would be something I'd be like, okay, he doesn't have it. We got to switch things up, right? But right now, what we're seeing is like you have a lot of people coming out in the Biden administration. Pete Buttigieg, General Milley, I believe, had a as well, who's not like a partisan figure, saying like, he's sharp in meetings, asking detailed questions that I don't even have the answers to. I have to go off and get more answers to bring the information back to him. I think Kevin McCarthy had a whole thing where during the budget negotiations, he was he would like come out of me and be like, man, Biden was sharp to his Republicans. And then he'd go out to the podium and be like, Biden doesn't have it. He's senile. And so I do think that it's important to keep an eye on like, okay, what are people who are actually working with Biden every day saying? Because with Feinstein, like people were not like, there were tons of leaks coming out all the time that she didn't have it together. That's not what we're seeing with Biden. But if that was happening, and if Biden was like unable to like give a speech, unable to like take questions, then I think you would have a very fair concern. I think that like maybe he can't do this. But right now, seems very clear. In all the meetings, people talk about Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, General Milley. They're all saying he's got it together. He's doing a good job, and he's very sharp. And we're seeing him press. He'll make a stumble here and there, but he's got it. So that's what I'd say to that.
All right. By the way, James LD says that Florida is not having a primary, but people can fact check all of us after.
They should have a primary. That's too bad if they don't.
Steve has a question.
Ooh,
what percent do you predict Phillips will get in Michigan?
That's a really good question. I would think like it's tough because also it's uncommitted, right? So that's going to take some percentage, I would think, of the anti-Biden vote.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably bet around like, maybe like 5 to 10%, something around that range. And I think that like if he didn't have uncommitted, he might get up to like 15%. Mm-hmm. But I think Biden's probably going to hit around like, 75% or so, something like that, 80%. I think most people are kind of at the point of like, we're ready to move on to the general election. And I guess for you, is there a point where you think like he should hit this margin to like stay in the race? Or if like if you got like, 5%, let's say for what Steve said, would you say it's time to pack it up and like drop out?
So first of all, I am not part of the Dean Phillips campaign. I'm just
right. I'm part of the
active supporter and volunteer. Personally, part of it for Michigan, part of it is affected by the big movement to do uncommitted, as you mentioned. However, I would say if Phillips got something like South Carolina, 3 or less. I mean, South Carolina, I think got 2. So he gets 3 or less. Yeah. He gets 3 or less. Even though I love Dean, I'd be like, bro, may not be in the cards. Yeah. If he gets something from 4 to 8, I would be like, you know what? You have every right to keep, speaking your truth and be on these ballots, and we'll see what happens in the convention. And if he gets double digits, though, if he gets 10 or higher in Michigan, even with the uncommitted stuff going on, I would be like, hey, like everyone that was like not sure or weak Biden supporter, like we might have a little something here. So that's, if I had to predict, I would say 8 is the number in my head, 7 to 8 maybe. And I would say that's respectable. It's not going to change the game. But, if it weren't for the uncommitted thing, I think he probably would have gotten double digits. But if he gets double with uncommitted in the race, like that's pretty interesting.
No, I think that, and especially if uncommitted gets up to double digits too, I think that would be interesting for sure.
There is a Quinnipiac poll that came out, a national poll, that had Phillips at 15%.
And Biden at 80, right?
Yeah, something like that. Or high 70s, something. And I was like thinking, wow, for a no-name congressman to get 15% in a national poll against an incumbent president has to be a little bit alarming to the Biden campaign. Like, why is this random guy getting 15%?
I mean, I think that's at the same time, right? Like when Marianne Williamson was in the race, right? She was getting like 13%, something like that in some polls, like 10%. Like, the polls were all over the place, but like you had a general range of like the non-Biden candidates were getting like.
Okay, so you're saying he just picked up all the non-Biden.
I mean, I think if you were someone who like didn't want Biden and wanted someone other than Biden, like I don't know how much it says about like growing support or not, because it's as the field narrows, in the same way like Nikki Haley picked up some support after DeSantis and Christie and all those people dropped out, but didn't mean that her odds of winning necessarily went up, right? But no, I mean, I think it's we'll see what happens in Michigan, but I think that Biden's probably going to have a pretty strong victory of like around like 75 to 80%, and we'll see if Dean Phillips breaks 10%. That would be interesting if he did.
Yeah. All right. We'll just take a couple more and then we'll wrap up. What did you think about the Hur report?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I have not read the entirety of it. I think generally speaking, it seems like similar to Comey letter that was done in 2016. There's a concern that if a special counsel kind of clears a Democrat of of charges, a lot of people in like kind of the MAGA universe will be really upset and say it's a rigged system, DOJ is corrupt, and all of that. I think there is a certain amount of pressure on special counsels that we saw to try to kind of not charge them the crime because they didn't do something that is worthy of charging a crime, but kind of rough them up a little bit, kind of like make it like do a few punches to show like, hey, I'm not a Democrat. I'm punching the Democrat too, you know? So I think there was an element of that where there's a feeling like we need to like do a few shots at Biden. And I think it's like the interview stuff to me felt a little over the line. I've never been in a deposition personally. I don't know if you've ever been in a deposition, but Biden was like in a 5-hour deposition that he volunteered to do, all while you had October 7th and like the Middle East, like kind of all like on the verge of like huge disaster and war. He's probably have a lot of late nights. The idea that like he remembered like the date of Hunter Biden's death, but he didn't remember the exact year. I think that's kind of like understandable, especially like something that deals with like grief. Like sometimes we block out kind of the exact year of a traumatic event. Like I think that her report, the stuff that they said about the memory, to me, it didn't feel like that big a deal. It felt like stuff that like I could imagine people making mistakes when they're under a lot of pressure, not getting a lot of sleep, and just like forget a date here and there. The broad like strokes though, like the Hur report are that like they don't have enough evidence to charge him with a crime. They don't have sufficient evidence for that, and so the issue is like done with on the classified documents. It's very different than what Trump did, where he didn't find the documents, return them. Trump literally like was like, I want to keep these, and lied to the FBI about having them. So I guess I would just say like I think it's fair to look at the Hur report and be like, I want Biden to do more events to show that he has it. Like that's a fair response to that. But I think I would not read the Hur report and think, okay, this means Biden doesn't have it, because I think there's all these like compilations. I think Jon Stewart even did one of like Biden, Trump and his kids all taking the stand and just not being able to remember basic things as well. I think it's a stressful experience being in a deposition, and I understand people forgetting things every now and then. I think we should be able to have a little bit of grace for people doing that and understand like this report, it's not designed to be like kind of a fair neutral thing. It's designed to kind of clear Biden of charges because he didn't do anything that deserves charges, but also kind of rough him up a little bit to make it seem like Hur isn't biased either way.
So that's interesting because I thought the Hur report was tough for Biden, not necessarily just because of the elderly man with a bad memory or whatever, but more because my interpretation of it was we think he did willfully hold on to documents. I think there were recordings between him and his biographer saying like, oh yeah, I can get you those confidential documents, they're downstairs. Like I think he knew that they were confidential and they were in his possession. But I think Hur was saying, I can't bring this to trial because a jury wouldn't be able to know for sure if he willfully did it because he is forgetful, which is kind of a double whammy for Biden in that, number one, it says that he did willfully keep these documents. Now he didn't do what Trump did, which is then try and hide them. That's even worse. But yeah, I didn't think it was a great report for Biden. And my point is like, okay, then the candidates should convince the voters like he's still got it. It's not on us to just trust him.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think it's perfectly right to say like it's on Biden to get out there and show that he can handle this, and I think he can. But I think that it's not just that like, and I'll be honest, I have not read the entire like report. I looked at certain parts of it. But my understanding was it wasn't just that like, oh, we're not charging him only because like we think he'd present himself to a jury as a well-meaning like elderly man. It was also things like they looked at, I think, the precedents of Reagan with his notebook. I think that there were also I don't think it was just the age thing. I think that's how it's been kind of cast in the media, but there were also other elements too. It wasn't like we've got like a cold hard case of like we could put him behind bars, but he's an old guy, so we can't. There was a lot more to that. Let's see. For example, at one point they say another viable defense is that Mr. Biden might not have retained the classified Afghanistan documents in his Virginia home at all. They could have been stored by mistake and without his knowledge. And that was an element too of like how much of this is him putting the documents there, or how much of it is like his staff maybe just putting it there and not letting him know. And so I would just say that like I think people have focused on that one line because it is like it's a bad line. About like we couldn't a jury might not convict a well-meaning elderly man. But there were other elements too, where they felt like we don't have the evidence or the precedence of the Reagan with his notebooks. Just makes this not a case that we can actually bring. So I do think that I'd encourage people to kind of look at, because it isn't just that element to it. There's more elements to it as well that kind of show they didn't have the evidence for it.
All right. Well, Philip, thank you so much for coming on the live stream. It's been a great conversation, and I think it's always amazing and wonderful when people with different political views can still have a cordial conversation and 100%. Share perspectives. And for sure, both of us, I think, will be doing everything we can to defeat Trump in November. And I look forward to that day.
Yeah, and I do just say, like, I think I'm very anxious about 2024. I'm sure everyone else is. And like, I think just the important thing is to try and turn that like anxiety and fear of Trump winning into like really good action. You know, talk to your friends, get your friends registered to vote, get them out to vote. And if you love Dean Phillips and want to vote for him in the primary, like go for it. But let's all like try and really come together. I think Biden's gonna be the nominee, and let's do everything we can to make sure he wins and Trump loses.
All right. Thanks, Philip. We'll see you. Hopefully we'll get you back on. Maybe if after the Michigan numbers, maybe we'll see how our predictions
went. Sounds great.
See you later.
Have a good one. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. I've got to get ready for another non-nerds related call. But let me know in the comments what you thought of that conversation. I like this Philip guy. He and I don't agree on who should be the nominee, but we do agree on a lot of things. And I understand the logic of his arguments, and I think he kind of understood the logic of mine. And so it's so nice to talk to a Biden supporter who isn't just saying like, oh, you know, anybody who supports Dean is completely crazy or insane or some secret MAGA person. How is this content coming to you? Part of it is coming to you because we have channel members who click the join link, and our biggest supporter who was in the live stream is Soldier One. He is the senior vice president. And then at the VP level, we've got Kristen and Bike. Next level is Hardcore. Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vanna, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, Yoda, and Nkiyu. And then for $1.99 a month to help keep this content going and for us to make more, we have the verified nerds who I will scroll through now. So thank you to all of you for your support for this channel. Do me a solid, like, share, and subscribe, and put in the comments, what do you think? Do you think we're going to see Biden do a town hall or long form interview before the convention? I'm thinking no. I hope he does, but I don't think he will. Let me know what you think. Bye, nerds.